Oh, good afternoon. My 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23 out of 140. It's about 14%. So then, welcome. It's Monday, and if it's Monday, we're in the basement learning about international shopping. I am your shopping instructor, Mr. Kovacs. I asked you last week, given the number of people, what kind of a model can you think of? I thought that perhaps the online videos, people thought that's good enough to pass the test, so people don't come to class. One explanation. We have fewer people this week, and you've had a test, a quiz. Do you actually have to come to this class to do well on the quiz? Not really. So, why are you here? The silence of brilliance. You come here because you want to learn something, presumably. That's my model for it. That's what I'm thinking of today as my model. Okay, no worries. Some professors get very nervous when there's not many people in the room. I'm happy that there's not so many people because this means I know that there are actually people who are interested in learning something. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Okay. We'll do chapters 6 and 7 today for your information. Bless you. This is where the final exam starts. Last week and the week before is not on the final exam. The final exam content starts today. Okay. We'll talk about essentially economic growth. Before we get into that, the first discussion was done fairly well, but please give specific examples. In other words, use positive economic statements as opposed to, what's the opposite of positive? Normative. Okay, opinions or generalities. Use specific examples. I would like to see specific examples. Look at my examples. We'll talk about growth. Interestingly, this week's discussion and next week's both talk about growth. But as opposed to the whole economy, it's your growth. It's your growth is what we're talking about in the discussions. Your growth. Email me if you have any concerns about what you should be putting in for the discussions. Read the feedback on the grade book. I put feedback. I did everyone's discussion. That's me. This week, it'll be the TA that they've got. And so, if you have any questions about how they grade it, email me, and then you can discuss with them for discussion 2, 3, 4, and 5. So discussion for personal response is tomorrow. Quiz Wednesday. Personal response Thursday. Okay, all good. So we'll talk about growth. All today is talking about essentially growth. So my question is, We'll talk about growth. There are growth models. We'll talk about a growth model, how we determine, is an economy growing? But first, what other models have we learned so far? What was the week 1 model? What was the first thing I taught you?
PPF.
Before the PPF and trade-offs and opportunity costs. What was the first thing that I taught you or suggested that you should learn? Even before the math.
Supply and demand function.
Well, before that, it was the first thing I actually said. My advice for success in this course. Remember? Remember? What's the first thing you do in the week? Watch the videos. What's the next? Or before you watch the videos, what do? Download the notes. Then you watch the videos. Then you can do the lectures and or what do you practice? Practice the quizzes. Then you come to class prepared. Then you practice the videos until you get what percent all the time? 80%, plus or minus. And what happens? You succeed. Is that so far? Is that model valid? The model is valid. You verified that, presumably. You listened to me and you verified that. Yep. All quizzes, none are dropped. Okay. That was the first model. Then, the PPF model. What did I ask you to memorize? Forget about PPF and trade-offs and all that. What about the picture I drew? What's the basic thing to remember? You get up in the morning to go to work, so you can get paid, so you can buy the stuff that you make. Okay, that was the second model. Then we added on to that when we talked about price discovery. What was the price discovery model? Remember? It had to do with corruption and forecasts. Remember? You get up in the morning to go to work so you can get paid so that you can buy the stuff that you made. And if forecasts are accurate, there's no corruption. That means that markets are efficient. Then what happens? Market's clear. Or, in other words, you get a price. Good. The one after that, what came after that? It had rule of law. If you have rule of law, what does it mean when you have rule of law? In general. If you have a rule of law, what does it mean?
Protection of properties.
Protection of property. You get to keep your stuff that you earn. You get to keep what's yours. You get to keep what's yours. And then, if you're able to keep what is yours, what you work for, your effort What happens if you work more? What happens if everyone works more? Hmm? To the whole economy.
Surplus.
You can have a surplus, that's if markets don't clear. But in general, the more you work, the more you earn. What happens to the smile on your face? It gets bigger. What's the other way to say that? Standard of living goes up. So if you're able to keep the stuff that you bought, if you're able to keep your earnings that you earn, in general, the more that everyone earns, the more that everyone has the greater the chance that there's a higher standard of living. But it depends on rule of law. The last thing from chapter 5, there's a problem though. The more you work, the more everyone works, what happens? Inflation. Prices go up. Why?
You spend more?
You spend more, true, but it's not on the spending side, it's on the working side. What happens on the working side, as more and more and more and more people work, surplus in quantity produced, that's if there's imbalance in the market. True. But in general, as more and more resources are used to produce,
Labor expensive.
resources become more expensive. Labor becomes more expensive. Capital, profit, land. Why? Scarcity. So you get up in the morning to go to work so that you can get paid to buy the stuff that you made. If you're able to keep the results of your effort, and markets are efficient, and there's no corruption, a price is set, the more everyone works, the better off the whole economy is, as long as you get to keep what you work for. But if too many people, if resources become scarce, because too many people are working too much production, if resources become scarce, in long run prices go up. There's how many was that? One model a week, 4 or 5. 4 or 5 models for you. Or one big model? 3 models? Okay. That's the general idea. Today, we're going to look at how do we know things are getting better? How do we know standard of living is going up? So in the introduction, here's a part of the new model. But remember, without rule of law and a financial system, savings would not facilitate growth in the economy via investment in capital in technology. So if we don't have rule of law or a financial system is the $M, that's the financial market, but it's also got the Bank of Canada, BOC involved, and it's got financial intermediaries, that's the little houses with the dollar signs in them. That's the financial system. If you're not able to keep the products of your effort, your income, your home, the stuff you buy, and there's no financial system, how could there be investment? How could there be investment in inventories and in better technology? How can an economy grow if its financial system is corrupt? Or the people are not able to keep the results of their work? Because recall, you go to work so that you can get paid. Whatever you don't consume, you save. But if the financial market is corrupt or it's inefficient, how do businesses, how do producers replace their worn out equipment, depreciation? How do they increase the amount of technological change or introduce new processes into the economy? Because without savings, there can be no investment through the financial markets. So if you can't keep what you earn, there's no savings. And if there's no financial market, an efficient financial market, then your savings, our savings, cannot be translated into investment and therefore growth in the economy. So the assumption here is that what is the main driving force of growth? Who's responsible for growth in general? Is it consumers or producers?
Consumers? Producers?
Which one?
Producers.
Generally, producers. Why? Because they're the ones that institute technological change. They are paying for technological change. That's one way to look at it. So, you can't have growth without rule of law. Which purple star is rule of law? 1, 2, 3, or 4? See the purple stars? There's a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. Which one is rule of law? You can't have growth without rule of law. Rule of law. You get to keep your stuff, what you pay for, what you work for. Which one of those, 1, 2, 3, or 4, indicates something that you own? Number one. Number one, that's your house. The government has made a road for you. Anything that's green is by the government, by the way, in this picture. So the house is number one. If you don't get to keep your house, the thing that you bought and paid for, you work for, the system doesn't work. There's no growth. There can't be growth. By default, there cannot be growth. Number two. Well, we'll leave number two for a second. If you don't have technological advancement, can there be growth? So that's number three, asterisk. If producers are not constantly upgrading their technology, and or the book talks about technology being an increase in output given a constant amount of inputs. That's a definition of technology. More output given the same amount of inputs. So labor, capital, land, entrepreneurial spirit, if those stay constant. But let's say you have a smart boss or a supervisor, and they organize your production environment such that maybe it's more enjoyable because you have longer lunch hours, or there's a coffee machine, free coffee, or they organize the department so that it is, so that there's more. Generally, I look at it like this. If you've got a good boss, productivity goes up. If you've got a terrible boss, people are quitting all the time. That means people have to be trained all the time, retrained all the time. What's going to happen to productivity or the amount that is produced per hour if you're always teaching someone how to do the job properly? And then they quit and go somewhere else. What happens to productivity? Goes down. If everyone in the economy is like that, what kind of economy do you have? Growing or dying? Okay. Does anyone know of countries in the world where it's almost a joke how unproductive the people are? Does anyone know? Don't tell me the names of countries. But there are countries in the world where people laugh about how unproductive they are. It's part of the culture. It's actually part of some cultures where you take long lunch out, you have long vacations, and when you go to work, you're working half of the time maybe. There are places like that in the world. I want to give you examples. So, how your company organizes its people, how your company increases its technological base. That increases growth. Number 4, reinvestment or investment in capital. You need to have the greater. It's not only the more capital you have, it's the quality of it. Keep that in the back of your mind. It's not how much. It's not how much. Because you can have too much capital. How many computers do you need to do your job? One computer. How many monitors do you need to do your job? Really? Just one? Has anyone? Okay. I need 2, tablet and an iMac. Has anyone worked with more than one monitor? Who has seen on TV people working with 2, 3, 4 monitors? You see that. If it's on TV streamed, it must be true. If it's on the internet, it must be true. There are people that will have 5, 6 monitors. That's a good way to think about it. It's not just how much capital, but it's the quality of the capital that really makes the difference. For example, 10 years ago, what was the best computer that you could buy? Versus now, what's the best computer that you can buy? And how much more can you do with it? Now, for all of you, 10 years ago, the computers were good. They're as good as they are today in doing the job, generally speaking. You go back to when I was your age, things have changed a lot. The amount that you could do, you hear it all the time. Today, you have in your hand a computer that it's probably bigger than what put a man on the moon in the 60s in your hand, in your cell phone. I used to have to go to the library if I wanted to find out how to spell the name of a country. Now you can do it on your phone. That's what this is talking about. The quality and amount of capital. As it's increased, you're able to do so much more in so little time. That's productivity. Doing more in less time. Doing more in less time. That's essentially growth. You're able to do more in less time. If you're able to do more in less time, what does that mean? What should that mean happens to your income or your wage? If you're able to do more in less time, what should happen to your wage? It should go up. Exactly. So then what does that mean for your lifestyle? You're able to do more in less time. It's good. So you can do more in less time. What does that mean for having fun? Relaxation. You get more. What's that called? Leisure. That word leisure, everyone knows that. Very good. When you become more productive, that means, in theory, you can make as much money as before, but you can do it on the beach. Which is why I can talk about that because I come from Chuckistan. Because in Chuckistan, we have the technological solution which allows its inhabitants to only have to work 3 hours a week and still have a wonderful lifestyle. That's the whole idea behind why I use Chuckistan, actually. So, you become more productive because you've got quality capital. You live in a country where you get to keep what you earn. At least you do in Chuckistan. I'm not sure about this country. You have companies which are always reinventing themselves, increasing their technological capability. And then there's number 2. This isn't talked a lot about in the textbook, but it's in there. Number 2 is HK. What's HK?
Human capital.
Oh, I heard so excellent. Human capital. Human capital. Oh, by the way, this is graduate economics right now. This is graduate level economics, HK theory. This is so leading edge that there's no answer to it in graduate school. I went to school 5 years ago for this. This is all we talked about was HK theory. You know how many different models there are? 6 or 7. No one has the ultimate answer to HK theory yet, human capital. But it's not all that difficult to think about. So you've got the technology, you've got a decent government that leaves you alone, lets you do your job, and lets you keep most of it for yourself. They take a little bit from you because you need to have good roads, the police, the infrastructure, a civilization, a good phone system, the rule of law. You have to have taxes for that. Take a little bit of income from the people. But HK, who's responsible for creating HK? The government? Private business? Who has the HK? Who has the human capital? Labor. Us. Us. So ultimately, who's responsible for increasing the human capital in the system, in the economy?
Firms and governments. Firms and governments.
They're not the people? Firms and government, they're not the people?
And the people.
And the people. Who's most important? Okay, let's rank it. That's essentially true, by the way. You've got government, you've got firms, and you've got individual actors. Ultimately, who is responsible for increasing the amount of human capital in the system?
Individual actors.
I would say individuals. And then, if you're lucky, the government and firms help too, if you're lucky. Who's had a job where the firm has said, our number one goal is to teach you so that you can be more productive? Has anyone had a job like that? Has anyone had a job where, has anyone had a job where the firm says nothing, and what they ultimately do is work you as hard as you can, teach you as little as can, pay you as little as they can, and the owners make as much money as they can? Yeah. Yeah. My thinking. It can be argued. And I said this at the end of last week's class. The best thing you can do for you when there's inflation, or any time, is invest in yourself. Exactly. If you're lucky and you find a company that invests in you, hallelujah. Okay. That's how growth works. Is you've got a government, and a lot of it depends on the government. If the government doesn't let you keep what's yours, like that's the first thing. Go somewhere else. It could be argued. After that, as long as firms are replenishing their capital, and they're advancing technologically, advancing technologically can mean that they're just organizing their workers more productively. And you've got people, a populace, that teach themselves and are always upgrading their skills, like determining which of their transferable skill sets is lacking, and therefore making a plan to increase their transferable skills. Discussion 2. Then the economy grows. Does anyone have a question about discussion 2? Because this is all about discussion 2. How are you going to grow as an individual? Anyone? Anyone have any questions about discussion 2? Please, when you do discussion 2, you need to mention one of 6 skill sets. It's either research and planning, organization management, communication, human relations, survival. And there's one more. Interpersonal. Okay. That's essentially what we're talking about here. Increasing your human capital so that you as a person can grow. Okay, good. So no one's got any questions about discussion. This ties right into the discussion. How do you grow? Choose something that you don't like to do, enjoy it while you learn it, and it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Just curious, because I mentioned about like technology and stuff like that. Is that one of the transferable skills? Like keeping updated with technology? And I thought
Mm-hmm. The way they talk about technology in the book, I don't particularly agree with it. But the fact is, technology, when you start to talk about technological advancement, it is everywhere. It's almost as though it's a constant in the whole model. You assume that technology is always advancing. Without it, we're all dying, going backwards, stagnating. Teaching yourself technology. Now now we're talking about the math. There's a mathematical, I would suggest there's a mathematical way to look at this. If technology is advancing all the time, how do you advance faster than that? If technology is advancing all the time, how can you get yourself to a point where you're actually growing faster than the normal person? Normal, quote unquote. There's the key. Normal, quote unquote. How do you position yourself to learn more technology? To use technology more effectively? How do you do that? Work more, work smarter, work harder than the average people. So what kind of a skill is that? Is that research and planning? Are you planning for the future? Are you simply surviving opposed to everyone else? Is it human relations? Is it communication? Is it organization management? Or is it a combination of those? Combination, which you can easily argue is a combination. If you had to choose one of those, what would be the most important thing? What is leading you to the teaching yourself more and better technology? Which one of the skills would you say? So that's just it. It could be organization management. It could be research and planning because you're looking for the future. If you're doing better than everyone else, to me that's a fight. You want to win the fight? So then which one of those essential skills is winning the fight? Survival, in my opinion. So you're doing what you have to do to beat everyone else. Good question. You know what you're going to say for discussion 2?
Unfortunately, I already posted it, so, but yeah, I was gonna
Did you use one of the 6 words?
I think I used survive.
Okay. I think you're able to delete your post before the due date and do a new one. I think you are. Someone let me know if you're able to actually delete a post before the due date, in case you didn't get it right. Okay. I'd like to think all of the things I've learned in my time, and they're all technological, I'd like to think it's because I knew it was coming. No. It's always been survival for me. I did what I thought was necessary to not go crazy. Any other questions? Yep.
Sir, what is the definition of human capital? Is that the skill and education that one has, or the money one earns?
Human capital is the experience and skills that an individual brings to the workplace, and or learns while on the job. So it's skills and experience, either before coming to the job, or you're increasing your human capital as you do a job because you're learning. So it's skills plus training plus experience. Skills plus training plus experience. Good question. HK. Any other questions? Well, by the way, there is actually a graduate level model that talks about human capital, and frankly, almost all of the HK models, the biggest, the primary source of agreement, disagreement, or discussion it's all about technology. Where do you put the technology in the function? Yeah, is it? I won't go any further. But it's an excellent question. Technology, how do you include technology in the development of human capital? That's graduate level economics. Congratulations, you've made it. I'll send you a test from my old days if you're really interested. You don't want to see them. One question, 5 pages, both sides, all math. Okay, so you have the big picture. Let's do some math. As you've all discovered, these questions you will see again, and if you practice the questions online continuously, you'll find out that if you know the math, no problems. Okay, so real GDP growth. Last year, Chuckistan had real GDP of 50 billion. This year, real GDP was 75. What was Chuckistan's real GDP growth rate over the past year? 1 decimal plus units of growth. Okie dokie. So what we will do, any problems downloading the notes, printing the notes? Did the notes all print nicely? Or you're just using the notes on your computer? Okay. So, last year's real GDP, this year's real GDP. Well, last year is going to be T minus 1. This year, therefore, is T. Thank you. And percent change in real GDP from T minus 1 to T, that's the year-over-year growth rate of real GDP. So then, the percent change in real GDP from T minus 1 to T, the equation is what's the general form when we do a percent growth? What minus what divided by what times what? Yep, 100%. So in general, it's current minus previous divided by previous times 100%. So that means we've got our GDP sub T minus our GDP sub T minus 1 divided by our GDP T minus 1 times 100%. That gives us 75.0 billion minus 50.0 billion divided by 50.0 billion times 100%. That gives us 25.0 billion over 50.0 billion times 100%. That's 0.5 times 100%. That is 50.0%. Therefore, the year over year, and here's a little notation for you, YR-YR is year over year. You may have Q-Q, quarter over quarter. What's different from last quarter? Or you can have last year's quarter to this year's quarter, or last week to this week. That's a general form of notation there. Year over year, quarter over quarter, etc. The year over year growth rate in real GDP was 50%. Okay? Questions? This calculation will not go away. In general, growth calculations, current minus previous divided by previous times 100% gives you a growth rate. Okay. Next, the rule of 70. The rule of 70 is a way to determine how long it takes to double given a growth rate. Double what? Double the size of an economy. Or double the size, okay, so that's if you're using percent change in GDP. What happens if you're using percent change in R? What are you doubling? If you're looking at percent change in R.
Real GDP.
Yeah, it is. If we're using percent change R GDP, then we're looking at growth in the economy. What if we're looking at percent change in little r? What's little r? Real interest. Then that means you're looking at growth in what? Interest rates? What do interest rates signify growth in? Income or investments or return on capital. What happens if you're looking at percent change W? And that indicates your growth in income. What happens if you're looking at, okay, so you can do percent change in real wage. That's an indicator of the growth of your income. You can do percent change in little r, real interest rates, which gives you the growth rate of your investments. You can look at percent change in real GDP. You can look at percent change in coconuts. All of this, it gives you a growth projection. Okay, so here, and this works for everything. This calculation, the rule of 70, it works for everything. Anything. So last year, Chuckistan had real GDP per capita. Per capita is real GDP divided by what? What's per capita? Per is divide. What is capita? Begins with a P and ends with a P. And then there's an Asian, ulation, population. So real GDP divided by population gives you per capita real GDP, or how much real GDP, in theory, is earned by each person in the economy. That's per capita. So last year, per capita growth was 1%, this year 2%. How long will it take for this economy to double its GDP at the current rate of growth? 1 decimal. Well, same type of calculation. Let percent delta real GDP T minus 1 per capita be last year's real rate of GDP per capita growth. That means percent change R GDP T per capita is this year's real GDP per capita growth. Then the year-over-year growth rate, here's the trick. That the other 100 people aren't going to know unless they watch the video. Year-over-year growth rate is percent change real GDP T minus percent change real GDP T minus 1. In other words, that's 2% minus 1%. That's the change in growth from one year to the next. You subtract. You subtract. And I'll show you why next. So years to double is 70 divided by the year-over-year growth rate. That's 70 divided by 2 minus 1. That's 70 divided by 1%. That's 70 years. So the number of years to double real GDP per capita at the current rate of 1% growth in Chuckistan is 70.0 years. And that 0.0, 1 decimal, all good? Everyone has these notes taken down? Where does this 70 come from? The book? The rule of 70. The rule of 70 is frankly, I don't know where it comes from. Therefore, I say it comes from the book. It's a calculation that has been developed it was developed in the past to predict how long it takes to double the size of something. Is that like a constant? Yes. It's what's the word for something that it's a law? I forget. It's a truth. It is believed to be a truth. That's a better way to put it. The rule of 70 is believed to be the truth as far as the manner by which you can determine how long it takes for a quantity to double given its growth rate. If you look it up, this is the rule of 70 is in biology, it's in economics, it's everywhere. It's a fundamental rule. Where does it come from? I'll get back to you. Any other questions? And no, I don't like giving answers like it's in the book, because it makes me look stupid. But that's the way that one is. Okay, graphing growth. You may be wondering, wait a minute, wait. Why are you subtracting? Why are you, like, what? I don't understand this subtraction part. Here's the reason, or an explanation. If an economy grows by x sub 0 in year 0, and x sub 1 in year 1, what was the change in growth from year 0 to year 1? Okay, well, if the growth in year 1 is greater than year 0, then x minus x0 is greater than 1. If they grew the same amount, then x1 minus x sub 0 is equal to 0. And if the growth rate was faster in the first year than it was in year 1, then x sub 1 minus x sub 0 is less than 0. Okay. What are the units of growth? In general, what are the units in growth? Percent. Okay, this only works for percent in this class. If you're in engineering, it'll change, but it's the same idea. Same idea. Engineering, commerce, everywhere. If you're dealing in growth rates, you can subtract or add. So here's what it looks like. So we have time on the x-axis, and we have real GDP in percent, real GDP growth on the y-axis. And we've got x1, x0. x0 is less than x sub 1. Those are growth rates. So x sub 0 is growth in year 0, 2 years ago. X sub 1 is growth in real GDP last year. How do we graph this? Notice, it's in percent. So, how do we graph x sub 0? And by the way, x sub 0 was, or whatever it was, it doesn't matter. It's a constant. How do we graph this? We have percent growth on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, and growth is constant. What's this? It's a linear function. What's its slope? 0, because it's constant. Growth is constant at how much? X sub 0. How long is the growth? For how long? From t equals, well, one period, period 0. Okay, now x1, x sub 1, is a higher growth, and it's constant. And I put the circle, the little circle here, because that's an endpoint. It changes. We have a change there. We don't know what the growth rate is exactly at these points, but one thing we know, it increases. So I'm using the 0 there, or the circle, because we don't know what the growth rate is there. It just automatically changes. So there's our growth rate in period 1. It's gone up. So what's the difference? So what's the growth from period 0 to period 1? That's the difference in those two growth rates. The assumption is during period 1, we're growing this much above the growth rate in period 0. So that is compounded growth. Compounded growth. The assumption is compounded growth. If the economy was growing 2% last year, and it's growing 3% this year, that means it's growing 3% on top of the 2% it already grew. In other words, the economy didn't lose its capacity year over year. It kept the same capacity from last year. It grew at 2% last year. It's growing at 3% on top of the 2% from last year this year. Another way to think of it is, do you forget what you learned in the winter semester? Well, some people do. I'm one of them. In general though, you remember a marginal amount from last semester, the important stuff, perhaps. And then this semester, you're growing on top of it. Compounded growth. Same reason why you start putting away, the same reason you save $1 every day. If you save $1 every day for a year, that's how you become rich fast. Compounded growth in interest. You can have it in real GDP, you can have compounded growth in wage, compounded growth in investment. And that's all. Okay, you get the idea. That's tricky. I've had students ask me before, why are you subtracting it? Because it's compounded on top of each other. If you want to look at what the graph looks like, if it's real GDP and, what are the units on real GDP? Oh, that's base year, $2012. So this is what the graph would look like. So if I get rid of this part, growth. In calculus, what do you have to do to get a growth in calculus? Anyone? First derivative. First derivative gives you a growth. So what you're seeing here, notice, so first derivative is slope. You're getting the slope of the equation. So here, what's the slope going to be? X0. And the slope here, X1. So, oops. Just so you understand what you're seeing, when your real GDP gets steeper, increased growth rate. Shallower, decreased growth rate. Any questions about this? Make sense? Okay. Next, long-run growth dynamics. Dynamics is a fancy way to say changes over time. Changes over time. So, true or false? Long-run growth increases as capital per hour worked increases. Capital per hour. How do you think about capital per hour? I talked about this at the beginning. What's an example? Your capital per hour increases. What's an example? What's an example of capital per hour increases? For you, your daily life.
Wage. Wage.
Is wage capital? I need a concrete example of capital. A house? We can work with that. What in your house what can you get more of in your house so that your growth increases? What can you buy for your house or your apartment or your tent or whatever you live in? What can you buy for that's going to increase your long run growth? Technology, a generic term, something specific. Specific, remember in the discussions, I need specificity. I bought some technology to increase my survival skill. Zero. I need to have the name of something.
Computer
What kind of computer?
for work.
Come on. Okay, as opposed to watching streaming, I know they're different. For example, you bought a 2019 iMac 27-inch because they are the easiest ones to max out the RAM doing it by yourself. That's a specific answer. Oh, by the way, I'm looking for a 2019 iMac 27-inch. I want to max it up to 40 gig, put it in an SSD, 2 SSDs, and you know what I'm doing. Because that technology in my home, that's going to increase my growth. You see where I'm going with, do you understand how specificity, being specific, it increases your grade, but it also means that you can plan for your future more effectively because you know what you need specifically to increase your rate of growth. Okay. So, long run growth increases as capital per hour where it increases. Where's capital per hour here? Actually, it's number 4. But it could also be, what's another form of capital? As an H at the beginning. So it could be which number? It could be number 2 as well. But generally, in the test, the quiz, if it's capital, that means down here, computers. If it's human capital, I'll say human capital, then it'll be teaching and training. So here's computers in your home. Okay, so if you've got a really good computer in your home versus you never used to have a computer before, your productivity and your growth rate's going to go up. True. So, as more and better capital is introduced to a constant sized population, and that's important, population can't change. As more and better capital is introduced to a constant sized population, output per worker increases, which implies more what per hour? As more and better capital is introduced to a constant size population, output per worker increases, which implies more income per hour worked over time, leading to growth in standard of living over time. More and better capital leads to essentially a higher wage rate, and that leads to growth in standard of living over time. PGDP dynamics. PGDP, potential gross domestic product. Potential gross domestic product. And potential gross domestic product is the maximum productive capacity, in theory, of an economy. The maximum productive capacity. Which model have we looked at that talks about maximum productive capacity? What's the name of that graph that shows the maximum productive capacity given factors of production and technology? What was the name of that graph? Begins with a P. PPF. So essentially what we're talking about is we have a PPF, which is for two goods, coconuts and bananas. But if you have the PPF for Chuckistan, and instead of coconuts and bananas, what happens if you put everything else on the y-axis? Instead of, I will decide whether I'm going to produce coconuts or bananas or a combination. What if it's coconuts versus everything else? Then this PPF isn't just for one company anymore, or for one little island paradise. All of a sudden, you can take this PPF and it's how much of one good you produce versus everything else. All of a sudden, you're talking about a whole economy in one little picture. Everything else comes from intermediate micro, by the way. It's not on the test, but it helps you to see that even though this is really simple, what we're looking at, coconuts versus bananas, you can actually expand it to a whole economy or your lives. Am I going to learn one piece of technology versus all of my other options I can learn? What's it going to do for my growth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so PGDP, what's the maximum output? That means that's the PPF. So what are the sources that are going to increase maximum output? Weaker Canadian dollar, true or false? Does a weaker Canadian dollar increase the maximum that you can produce? No. On the job experience, is this going to, in the long run, the more you learn on the job, is it going to increase your growth or do nothing? Increases. Discovery of new technology. True, increases your output, potential output. Doesn't mean it will. What happens if you learn the wrong technology? What happens if a competitor can make use of the technology more effectively than you? And you put all that time into learning basic coding instead of C++, for example. Okay, rising stock market prices. Are these going to affect the maximum capacity, productive capacity of you or the economy? No, false. Physical capital per worker. You have better computers. You have a computer. You have a tablet that you can do homework on the bus or stream video. True, that's going to increase your maximum capacity. Saving and investment in physical capital. If you do not have a sound financial market and you're not able to keep your savings, you're not going to grow. Therefore, the opposite is true. You need to have a savings and investment in physical capital to increase the probability of growth. Please keep this in mind. Everything we talk about is probabilistic. There is no guarantee. Nothing is 100%. You increase the chance of growth. And education and training. I think that's why we're all here, to increase your potential. That's education. Why do you get educated? So that you can increase the probability of future earnings growth above what you would get doing everything else. And here are the pictures. Let's see, weaker Canadian dollar. Well, that would be in the financial market. There's no asterisk there. On the job experience, which one is that? 1, 2, 3, or 4? 2. Discovery of new technologies, 1, 2, 3, or 4? 3. Rising stock market, that's over here. Physical capital per worker, 1, 2, 3, or 4? 2, 4. Let's keep it on 4. Let's keep 2 just for human capital, okay? Or intellectual property, IP. Question. 2 is personal, intellectual property, human capital per person, whereas 4 is more and better capital. Investment in more and better capital. So investment by producers in more and better capital, as opposed to investment by individuals in personal human capital. So corporate capital investment versus human capital investment. Good question. Stock market, physical capital, number 4. Saving and investment in physical capital, number 4. Education and training, number 2. Okay. Public saving. This has to do with government policy and a little bit of math. So public saving is, let's go up to here. So the government takes in taxes. It spends some in consumption. It needs to operate. It gives some back in the form of subsidies. So it has its tax revenue minus government spending minus government subsidies will tell you whether the government is in debt or it has been saving. No different than us. We have income, we have expenditure. We are either saving or dissaving. Same idea with the government, except its revenue comes from us. And its expenditures, some for pencils, some for computers, but some of it goes to subsidization of its people. And that's the little green. The green here. Those are subsidies to individuals and businesses to increase efficiency or to invest in projects which are too big for private citizens to accomplish, or for business. Because let's face it, can one business create all of the infrastructure, all the roads in Canada? No. All the railways? No. All the telecommunications? No. That's why the government usually creates some projects, do investment, because other businesses, private businesses, aren't big enough to take care of it.
So, public saving. Calculate the amount of public saving given the data. And then we'll take a break. So, you're given YCGTRT. Let Y equal income, C equal consumption and expenditure, G equal government, TR net transfers. That's indirect taxes less subsidies. Indirect taxes less subsidies. T, total tax revenue. S sub pub, total public savings, or how much the government is saving above its expenditures. So, if it's how much the government is spending relative to its revenue. So what, if we have S sub pub, we have something minus something minus something. What's the first thing? That's income. What's government income? YCGTRT. T. I say it like it's easy. You're saying it as though you're wondering. Good. This is a little bit tricky. The government's income is tax revenue. T. Okay. What's it called when the government is spending on air conditioning? G. What's it called when you're spending on air conditioning? C. Then, net transfers. The subsidies that are going back to people. Not employment insurance, but Canada pension, subsidies to businesses. That's going to be TR. Net transfers, net transfers, net transfers. Fill in the blanks. T is 20 minus government expenditure is 30 minus TR is 5. That gives us negative 15. The total amount of public saving is negative 15, or the public, what's it called when the government spends more than it earns? Begins with a D. Deficit. The public deficit is 15. Once again, remember back to opportunity cost, the calculation is negative, but as soon as you say cost, it's a positive number. Here, total amount of public saving is negative 15, or the deficit cost is 15. Take a break, come back at 2:40. 2:40. Come back at 2:40. Any questions? Come on up. Okay, we're back and still on chapter 6. Thank you. Demand for loanable funds. So we talk about loanable funds, and this takes place in the financial markets. That's the little house with the dollar sign and the M. And inside, I'm not going to talk over people. Thank you. The financial markets is where we have things like foreign exchange, equity, debt, forex, equity, debt, money, Those are the four main markets inside of financial system. The loanable funds market. Loanable funds has to do with the ability to obtain investment funds from individual savings. That's that's the loanable funds market. Loanable funds, debt, going into debt, taking out a loan, going into debt, same. So, and this is really important, if you do not have a market to price long-term investment, how do you get long-term investment? How do you increase your technological base? How do you increase your productive capacity if there's nowhere to get long-term investment? Long-term investment. Long-term investment. Why do I stress long-term? Because you can't build a building and get new computers and robots in a week. It takes years. And so what happens because of this, the price of long-term investment is a real term, real interest rates. Because over the long run, what happens in the long run? Guaranteed. What happens to prices in the long run? Guaranteed. They go up. That's called inflation. So real interest rates, real wage rates, real land rent rates, real profit goes down or is reduced because of inflation. Same with the loanable funds market. If you want to invest in yourself, you don't look at the interest rate on your checking account. That's how much you get paid every month. Yeah. That's a nominal rate. It's got inflation in it. But real rates, you determine if you're going to invest in your company or yourself depending on the long-term return. And in the long run, because prices go up, you have to moderate your return numbers. And people don't do that. How much are you going to make? I made 10%. How much was inflation? You didn't make 10%. It's a common mistake. Okay, so back to loanable funds. There is a market where the price of debt for investment is discovered. So here, true or false? The demand for loanable funds illustrates a negative correlation between quantity of loanable funds demanded and the real interest rate. Okay, well, this is the real interest rate, long term. Units, percent. Need an up arrow, need an origin, need another arrow. Quantity of loanable funds, QLF for quantity loanable funds. The units is going to be in dollars per year. So, it's a demand curve. Demand curves are pretty much always the same. They have a negative slope, which means there's a negative correlation between the dependent and independent variable. So right there, you should know, I shouldn't have to do anything else. Is there a negative correlation between quantity of loanable funds demanded and real interest rate? Yes or no? What's the independent variable? Which is the independent variable? Real interest rate. So the dependent, quantity. So is there a negative correlation between quantity and real interest? How do you know? How do you determine, where do you see a negative correlation between independent and dependent? What do you see? It's the triangle, yeah. Or the triangle, perfect, there's their triangle. Or to put it another way, what's the slope? Negative slope. Negative slope, negative correlation. Or it's the triangle, if you're drawing it like so. But just to make it a little bit more mathematical, so we have the demand for loanable funds. Demand for loanable funds increases in expected profit and decreases in taxes. So that's affecting the x-intercept. We have there's our x-intercept, I'll call that L sub 0. At interest rates of R2, we have quantity of loanable funds of L2. At interest rate of R1, a higher interest rate, we have L1 of quantity of loanable funds, which is less than L2. We have all of our variables being announced. So, if QDLF, the quantity of loanable funds, the demand curve, is a function, there's the F. What's the name of the function? Demand for loanable funds. So the quantity of loanable funds demanded is given by a function called demand of loanable funds. And what are the constraints or the variables that determine? First, real interest, then expected profit. Let me make that pretty. Demand for loanable funds depends on real rates, expected profit, and taxes, corporate taxes. What's the equation for this? It's L sub 0 plus M times R. R being real interest rate, L sub 0 being the x-intercept. M, what's M? Well, I should put an MD there. And MD is equal to delta what? Divided by delta what? And remember, there's a trick here. Here's the trick. It's an inverse demand curve. So is it del y by del x or del x by del y? X by y. What's on the x-axis? QLF, the quantity of loanable funds demanded, divided by delta R. And just to complete it, that's going to be L2 minus L1, R2 minus R1. And since, therefore, negative correlation. So, what's the inequality? R2 versus R1. What's the inequality? R2 is less than R1. So if R2 is less than R1 on the bottom, what does that mean about MD, or the slope of the demand curve? It's negative. So in other words, and right there, there's the end of your proof. There's a negative correlation between quantity of loanable funds and interest rates. How do we know? Because the slope of the line is negative. Or to put it another way, as R changes, in this case from R1 to R2, interest rates are going down. What happens to the quantity of loanable funds demanded? It goes from L1 to R2, which is an increase, if I'm not mistaken. Therefore, there is a negative correlation between quantity of loanable funds demanded and real interest rates. So in other words, if it asks you, if it states there is a negative correlation between quantity and price, what do you have to prove? Triangle or slope is negative. Now, if it says what's coming next, the demand for loanable funds decreases as expected future profits increase. What's this asking you to prove? First it was negative correlation, negative slope. So you're staying on the curve. Here, what's it asking for you to prove? How does the intercept change? How does the intercept change? So notice the wording. Quantity and price, or real interest rate. Real interest rate is the price on quantity of loanable funds. But down here, it's saying, what's demand? Is that QLF? That's F. It's asking what happens to the function given a constraint. So, in other words, how am I labeling this? Demand for loanable funds. It's asking expected future profits. It wants to know, is this plus or minus? And that affects L0, your intercept. So here, once again, R percent arrow 0 0 QLF dollar per year. Okay. So we have L0, DLF. Do corporations demand more loanable funds at every interest rate when they expect their profits are going up? So if the company believes that profits are going to be increasing in the future, are they going to invest more now or wait for the future? Invest more now. If they think taxes are going up in the future, are they going to invest more now or wait? Actually, it ends up being negative. think I ought to think about that for a second too. You've got me wondering. At any rate, you would think that if taxes are going to go up in the future that you would invest more now. That's what you would think. But I'll get back for next week. Don't send me an email, okay? Okay. So, essentially what happens here is if you assume that expected future profits are increasing, you have a shift from DLF to DLF prime, which is an increase in the y-intercept from L0 to L0 prime. And so at the real rate of R1, now A1, there's a new but the curve shifts to the right. At each interest rate, R1 and R2, more funds, L1 prime at R1, and a new L2 prime at B prime, or at R2. What this is showing is that, okay, here's the story. If corporations believe that in the future profits are going to increase on all the things that they're selling, then they're going to want to increase their productive capacity now at all interest rates. So it doesn't matter what the interest rate is. Small company probably pays a higher interest rate than a big company, just because bigger companies can get a better deal in the loanable funds market. That just happens to be the way it works. We have to pay a premium when we want to take a loan, whereas companies get a better interest rate. This is why you might see different interest rates on the demand curve. So, because companies believe that they can make more profits in the future, they're going to want to invest more now at every interest rate, and this is why the curve shifts to the right. So to fill in all the equations here, if we have QDLF, the original demand curve, and it depends on real rates, expected profit, taxes, and its equation is L sub 0 plus MDR, no change from before. Then we have the new curve, QD prime. It's shifted outwards. Well, it's the same demand function, only we're calling it D prime now. It still depends on R, it still depends on tax rates, but now expected profit has increased. Now, expected profit increases, what does that affect? L sub 0, the intercept. MD is the same, still have the same interest rates, but at every interest rate, there's more quantity demanded because the increase in expected profits has caused the curve to shift from L0 to L0 prime. holding all interest rates constant. So what this is saying is the curve shifted to the right. Why? Because demand for loanable funds increases in expected future profit. And so L1 prime is greater than L1, L2 prime is greater than L2. That's here. In other words, we went from A to A prime, B to B prime. That implies that QD prime, for a lack of a better way to put it, is greater than QD, or it shifted to the right, holding interest rates constant. And therefore, demand for loanable funds increases in expected profit. We can say this because the slope hasn't changed. Slope hasn't changed. And we're assuming that the intercept is positively, this is what we're actually testing, that the parameter on expected profits is greater than 0. In other words, positive. Here's the positive here. Demand for loanable funds increases in expected profit is the same way of saying that the y-intercept, L0, is proportional to n, a parameter, some number, like slope, only a different number, and it's not slope. It's just a parameter, a number. The intercept is proportional to the parameter times expected future profits, and that parameter is greater than 0. So it causes the curve to shift to the right. If n was less than 0, then an increase in that variable would cause the curve to shift to the left. Questions? No questions? So, true. Wait a minute. Demand for loanable funds decreases as expected future profits increase. True or false? Is that statement true or false? Demand for loanable funds decreases as expected future profits increase. That's right. It's false. Demand for loanable funds increases. Why? Because of that. Which is the same way as saying if expected future profits increases, demand for loanable funds shifts to the right. So the demand for loanable funds increases as expected future profits increase. Questions? Problems? Okay. The market for loanable funds. Choose all that are correct. Given an increase in the desire to consume, the following occurs. So we're talking about loanable funds, and then the question is desire to consume. First question, is that demand or supply? What does consumption have to do with loanable funds? Get up in the morning, you go to work so you can get paid to buy the stuff that you made. After the government taxes you, you're left with disposable income. Disposable income can either be consumed or saved. Your willingness to consume has changed. Is that going to affect loanable funds? Which one? Savings, supply or demand? Supply. Because savings gives supply of loanable funds. Savings gives you the supply of loanable funds. Where's the picture? Savings gives the funds available to finance investment. So, what happens? Let's see. The desire to consume, an increase in the desire to consume. Well, supply of loanable funds, SLF, is dependent upon consumption. What's TIS? Tax incentives to save, and BUD, budget deficits. The question is, if you start to want to consume more, what happens to supply at all interest rates? So if everyone in the economy decides, we're going to consume more. We're going to consume more at all interest rates. What happens to the supply curve? We're going to consume more at all interest rates. What happens to the supply of loanable funds? What happens to the supply of savings? If everyone is consuming more, what happens to the amount of savings? Goes down. If the amount of savings goes down, what happens to the total quantity of savings available? Goes down at all interest rates. What happens to supply? Shifts to the left. Shifts to the left? Yeah, towards the origin, towards zero. There's another way to remember. How do you know it's a decrease? Because you're going towards the origin, zero. So, you already know what's going to happen here. We have a new supply curve. And I'll put it right there. And it's shifted to the left automatically. So, what's happened to the y-intercept? It's gotten more negative. L sub 0 prime. What's happened at the old equilibrium interest rate? We used to be at E star with R star and L star. We're given the price for loanable funds at R star. What's the quantity of loanable funds demanded and supplied? L star. But now people are consuming more and saving less. So at the old interest rate of R star, what's happened to the supply, what's happened to the quantity of loanable funds? Follow the demand curve. Or drop a perpendicular. At the old interest rate, now we're at L negative, quantity of loanable funds demanded and supplied. So quantity of loanable funds demanded and supplied has gone down at the old interest rate, the old equilibrium interest rate. So let's say you could get a loan at 5%. Then everyone in the economy decides they're going to save less. That means less is available. So automatically, if less funds are available, there's, at the old interest rate, less funds are available for loans. That's at the old equilibrium rate. But now there's a new equilibrium rate. It's going to be at E prime and that is going to give R prime as the new equilibrium interest rate and L prime as the new quantity of loanable funds demanded and supplied. I better put R in here in percent. QLF, dollars per year. This is going to be, let me put this in purple. So we have the new supply curve, S prime LF. Consumption has gone up, and it is it is a negative. Whereas tax incentives to save are a positive, or it supply increases in incentives to save, and budget deficits are a negative, or supply of loanable funds decreases in budget deficits. So we've had an increase in the amount of consumption. This has caused the supply curve to shift to the left because everyone is more interested in spending as opposed to savings, which means there's less supply of loanable funds available. The new equilibrium takes this into account. At the old interest rate of R star, there are excess supply, excess quantity supplied, or excess quantity demanded at the old interest rate. At the old interest rate, the old equilibrium interest rate, is there excess quantity demanded of loanable funds? Excess supply of excess quantity of loanable funds supplied. Which one is it at the old interest rates? We've gone from here to here at the old, so here's the new supply curve, supply of loanable funds, S prime. At the old interest rate, what would have been the quantity supplied? L negative. What's the quantity demanded? L star. So forget about S being there. So at the old interest rate, given the shift, we have quantity of loanable funds demanded is larger than supplied. When demand is larger than supply, or if the quantity demanded is larger than the quantity supplied, does that infer upward price pressure or downward price pressure? Quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. Upward price pressure, because people are fighting over the quantity. There's not enough quantity. There's not enough loanable funds quantity, because people are buying instead of saving. So if actors will bid up the price of loanable funds. The price of loanable funds is also known as real interest rates, long-term interest rates. And that's how eventually we get to the new equilibrium, higher interest rates, real interest rates, and lower quantity of loanable funds. Market clears, but with less quantity and higher prices. Why? Because people decided that they are going to spend instead of save. Does anyone know what's happened to
the willingness to spend over the past 3 months? Take a guess. Willing, so we have up and we have down. So either economic turmoil and uncertainty has caused people to save more or to spend more. Let's see. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so I'm either spending more or I'm saving more. Unless you believe that the apocalypse is coming, then everyone's going and buying guns and ammunition and storing food. And who needs money anyways if the zombies are coming? You guys know about zombies, yes? So if the zombies are coming, is it what's the sense of having money in the bank if the zombies are coming? Do zombies use currency? Thanks for playing. This assumes that zombies are not coming. Then the whole model gets flipped. But in actuality, savings have gone up substantially over the past 6 months or more. Substantially. Look it up. Look it up on Stats Canada. It's significant. It's significant. So that's going to change. That changes everything. Because if people are saving more now, substantially, if that happens, what's going to happen to interest rates? Rates are going to go up. What's already happening to inflation? What's going to happen to future and current, what in theory should be happening to future and current investment? Send me an email. And so, is it a good time to invest in yourself? Oh yeah. Okay. So down here, the slope on the supply curve is positive. The parameter on consumption is negative because supply decreases in willingness to consume. So that puts a plus above here, a minus above the tax. And so what this shows is that we have a new, I've got that, that's a D. And you have M. Oh, that's not D. What this is saying is that the supply curve has changed, but the demand curve has not changed, MDR, and it's got a slope that is negative. So I'm being thorough with this. What this is saying is that interest rates have gone up and quantity of loanable funds at equilibrium has decreased. The demand curve has not changed. And this continues. So the supply of loanable funds, it's positive here, negative, TI positive, negative on budget deficits. We started with L sub 0 plus MSR. We had a shift, which had an increase in consumption, holding the rest constant. So this caused us to go to L0 prime, shifted to the left, but the slope stayed the same. So L0 prime is less than L0. The curve shifted to the left.
holding interest rates constant. And so altogether what this said is, and I showed you this, if we take the demand curve at the old interest rate, equilibrium interest rate, R star, and we compare it to the new supply curve at R star, what you notice is that demand is greater than the quantity demanded is greater than the supply. That means we have an excess quantity of loanable funds demanded. So as that means we go from E star to E prime. As market clears, actors are bidding on scarce debt. Therefore, long-term interest rates adjust upward until excess quantity of loanable funds demanded is eliminated. Therefore, as actors become more willing to consume, the resulting competition for the resulting competition for the reduced funds available to finance investment increases long-term interest finance rates. That was a long way to say people consume more, therefore less available funds for supplying debt and investment. And as soon as there are less funds available, competition for the remaining funds bids up the price. And so ultimately, real interest rates go up and there's less available for investment. Now, for the final exam, a question might be, would you want to be participating in this economy over the next 5 years? Or would you go somewhere where long-term interest rates are lower, for example? Would you want to be in an economy like this, like what we're in now? Or would you rather be in an economy where interest rates appear to be going lower over time? Okay, that's a final exam question. That kind of thinking. The final exam has no pictures, there's no math. Remember, it's true and false questions, and it's can you think, given what we've talked about. Okay, in summary, if you increase productivity, that increases growth, that increases standard of living. What does an increase in growth, increase in productivity mean? More capital per hour. In other words, you've got a better place to work at. If the place that you're working at per person gets better, that means you can produce more per person. In other words, if you like your boss, you're probably going to produce more per hour than if you hate your boss and your coworkers. And if you've got better technology per person or per firm, that implies you can make more per person, per firm. No growth without increased HK. So, what did we learn? What did it take us an hour and a half? 2.5 hours to learn? Memorize the pictures. You'll be fine. Just know what the pictures mean.
Questions? Have you seen this work in your lives? Does it actually work like this for you? Generally. Yeah. And if you've had a bad boss or a good boss, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Or a good professor, so-so professor. Or notes and videos that you can download and watch before the class. But you don't come to class prepared. What happens to your productivity? You come to class at, oh yeah. I used to do that. No questions? You're all good. I know the math is, but I suspect the math helps you understand. Does the math actually help you understand when I'm going through it? That you understand what is actually happening? Okay, if you're not doing this and not doing that, then okay. No worries. That was chapter 6. Chapter 7, luckily, is much shorter. So, yep. Oh, wait a minute. Well, it's recorded unless there's technical difficulties. It's all, just remember, all the video, whatever's on the video is on the test. What we're talking about here is only to make your life easier on the test. It's the same. The test doesn't change just because you're here. That being said,